Goedemiddag allemaal, welkom op dit middaggesprek. Omdat een van onze respondenten, dus Paul Newton Jackson, een muzikoloog van geen Nederlands kan, zal deze uiteenzetting, dit middaggesprek in het Engels plaatsgrijpen. I don't know if you have ever heard about Georg Österreich, a German Baroque composer. I haven't. He began his career as a singer and later became a court composer. He was also an avid collector of musical compositions and is on the basis of the Sammlung Bokemeyer, which today is in the Berlin State Library. Georg Österreich's work was not much appreciated until recently. So, for instance, Harald Kummerling, a leading musicologist, wrote about Österreich. Österreich was wie Düben ein großer Sammler, aber ein unfruchtbarer Komponist. But at the time Kummerling wrote that, the efforts of historical performance practice to adequately reproduce early and high Baroque music appeared not yet fully developed. And this is where our guest speaker enters the picture, Beniamino Paganini, one of the artist directors of the ensemble Musica Gloria. He will explain to us what is involved in interpreting and recording and representing unknown ancient scores. Give him the floor.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy to speak here today indeed about Georg Österreich and the project we did around him. I will just start by giving a small example of a piece by Georg Österreich. You will see in the video also where we recorded it, so I will tell more about this a bit in a minute, but basically we went to the north of Germany to record it in a small church with a historical organ. And I will let you hear a little bit of the beginning, which is the instrumental Sinfonia, and then a little bit of the end, where it's a tutti piece with also the singers. A bit. Oh. Oi. I will give it another try. So that were a few fragments just to give an idea about this music. So I will tell a little bit about how we came into this program, about how we searched for an organ, and then some small things which I will do very briefly, and the extras are maybe more for if there would be some questions who are linked to that. So the whole project actually started somewhere completely else. So we like a lot 17th century music, but in the 17th century, the oboe was not yet so popular and so much in use. And so actually Nele Vertommen, who leads the ensemble together with me, she started searching for repertoire with oboe of the 17th century. And by doing this, she came into the online library in Berlin. She stumbled on some German cantatas with oboe, which is quite special because in the 17th century the oboe was not yet so much in use, in any case not in Germany and in sacred music. And like that, it became clear that most of these cantatas with oboe were from a collection from Georg Österreich, the topic of today. There are around 1,800 scores in this collection, a lot of German Protestant cantatas, and there are pieces from himself, Georg Österreich, pieces from colleagues from him, teachers, students, people from his circle, and then people who are a little bit further from his real circle. For example, some of the music from Buxtehude, who is already a little bit more known, is only preserved in this collection. So it's a quite important collection. And then one of his students, Heinrich Bokemeyer, took over the collection and made it even a little bit larger. And actually it's now under his name that the collection is known, although the biggest part is actually made by Georg Österreich. There's a very interesting book from Konrad Kuster, a musicologist who investigated in this music, in this collection. And we had a lot of contact with him also when we were making the program. And we wanted to have two things in the selection we made for this CD program. We wanted to have a combination of composers who have an important role in the life of Georg. So, for example, Buxtehude, who is more known, we didn't really include him because he was not directly linked to Georg Österreich. And what is also very interesting in this collection is that there's a huge variety of settings, of combinations, of instruments. And so, for example, there are pieces with only one singer and the whole ensemble, or there are pieces with four singers, but then not always the logical combination. So, for example, two sopranos, one alto and one tenor, no bass. So there's a lot of variety. And also with the instruments, there are pieces with 5-string parts. There are pieces with also two oboes, without two oboes. So we wanted to have this variety also in our program. And the story of Georg Österreich is it's almost possible to tell it with the composers who are also in the program. So there is Johann Theile, who was a teacher of him, and also the teacher of the first teacher of Georg Österreich, Johann Scheffler. Johann Theile, he was a kind of mentor because he introduced Theile also to different positions, and he then also taught him, and they stayed in contact for a long time. They were kind of friends, we could say. Georg Österreich also had a brother, Michael Österreich, who they studied together, so they went to Leipzig, then to Hamburg. And then they both worked also in Gottorf, which is really in the north of Germany. And there, Michael Österreich was rather working in the administration, but still we found a very beautiful Vater Unser from him, which is really one of the beautiful pieces of the program. Giulio Giuliani, so when he was in Wolfenbüttel, the first place where he worked, it was both a kind of colleague, but he had also lessons because Georg Österreich was a tenor, so a singer. So he had lessons also with this Giulio Giuliani. Then there is Johann Philipp Furch, I told already, so, Georg Österreich, he worked in Gottorf. There he became Hofkapellmeister. And Johann Philipp Fürst was before Österreich working there, and he actually also introduced Georg Österreich for this function. Johann Friedrich Meister was also working in the north of Germany. They met quite early when Georg Österreich moved to Gottorf. And then, so I told already, Heinrich Bokemeyer was a student of Georg Österreich, and he then took over the collection. We are playing in this program sacred music, and back in the days, sacred music was, of course, performed in churches. And in churches there was always an organ, so it was also performed with the organ of the church. Nowadays, when we have to perform Baroque music in concert halls, sometimes there is no organ, or sometimes we play in a church, but the organ is not fitting to the repertoire, so we have to bring a kind of organ box. But for this recording, you always have the chance to go where you want. Not completely, but there's a lot of factors to take into account, but still, you have a little bit more flexibility. And because it's really the main instrument in sacred music in the Baroque period, we found it very important to find a fitting organ. And quite soon, it became clear that probably an organ from Arp Schnitger would be a logical option. He was a German organ builder, active in the north of the Netherlands and the north of Germany. So really the right region, also the right period, around 1700. And he made a lot of organs, from which about 30 are still existent. Organs are big instruments, so of course he could not do everything on his own. So he had master servants, but he still was the one who led the whole organ company, let's say. And what was important for us for this recording was to have an organ in a historical temperament. I cannot really go into detail, but basically on the modern piano, the difference between each half tone is actually the same. In the Baroque period, this was not the case, and this gives another color to the music. So it's in order to perform this music in a good way, we think it's very important to have this historical temperament, because one of the reasons why some people in the beginning of the 20th century might not have liked Georg Österreich is because if you use a modern temperament where each half tone is the same, then you lose a lot of the color in the music. We were with 10 musicians, 8 singers, so we had to have enough space. Sometimes next to the organ there is not a lot of space. And also we have our wind instruments, which are at a certain pitch. So already quite a few things to take into account. First, we went to visit Gottorf because the Kapelle, this is a picture, is still very much in the same condition as in the 17th century when Georg Österreich was working there, so it was quite special to be there. Unfortunately, the only thing which is not like it was in the days of Georg Österreich is the organ. So the case is still original, but it's a new organ which is inside, which is not completely faithful, it's not in a historical temperament. And another thing is that they reopened a military base just 3 kilometers from there. So every few minutes there was an airplane, military airplane. So of course you don't want to have that on your recording. So this option unfortunately fell off. For some months we thought, let's do it in Groningen. There is a reconstructed Schnitger organ, very beautiful, a big balcony, good conditions to record, but we said we want to still see it ourselves. And the temperament, it came out, it was not so historical or so 17th century as they told via phone. So always good to check yourself. So also this option fell off. In Ganderkezee there is a beautiful original Schnitger organ, but the pitch is very particular, so it does not really work with the wind instruments we had. Also, it was already half year before the recording, so we really had to find something. It was not so silent because there was a road close by. And although it's a very beautiful organ, we found it was a little bit less nice and captivating than the organ in Holland where we finally made our recording. So it has an original Schnitger organ. The size is also a little bit similar to the organ we saw in Gottorf. It's a little bit bigger, but Schnitger also has huge organs with 4 manuals, and so still it's a little bit the same category, and it has a lot of original pipes, a good pitch, and so there are 2 balconies, you see it, so there's one here where we were with the musicians in the video, and then there's a balcony close to the organ. We thought we will put the 8 singers there, but it's always difficult to measure how much space you exactly need in such a form. And so when we arrived on the first day, we realized it was too small actually on the balcony, so that's why we had to imagine a quite special setup with the musicians on the side balcony, and then the organ in the middle, of course, that we cannot move, and then the singers were downstairs, but they stood up the benches because then the difference was already a little bit less. So that's why it looks a bit special also on the video. Then there is the continuo, so also there I cannot go in detail, but basically the basso continuo in the Baroque period is the lowest bass line which has numbers for chords, and so there are always melodic instruments who play it, like cello, bassoon, and then there are harmonic instruments who usually play also the bass plus chords. And in the scores there's not written like you should do it with this and this and this instrument, and so we had to take decisions there, and we looked in the repertoire in which instruments were used in that circle for the continuo. So sometimes there was a mention, not in the pieces we played, like to harpsichord. So we used harpsichord, cello, bassoon, dulcian, and organ. And then, of course, with the organ also you have a lot of registers, so you need to choose which register to use. So that was also very interesting to try to fit it to the certain affect which is in the text and the music, to adapt it. And so here I have a list. This is one of the pieces we did, and so you see that each movement is with other registers and with other combination of instruments, so this gives also a lot of possibilities. If we have time, I will end with a small fragment where you can also hear very well the organ. Of course, there's more than just the continuo and the organ. This is first page of one of the pieces. And as you can see, so there's violino, violino, oboe, oboe, so 2 violins, 2 oboes, and then there's written violetta and violetta. But if you look very well, it is in C clefs. So the violetta, the highest one, if you look well, this clef is written 1 line lower than the second violetta. So the first violetta is on the 3rd line, so there is a C, and the violetta, the second one, is on the 4th line. And in Baroque period, this was the 3rd line. C clef was referred to as the alto clef, and on the 4th line as a tenor clef. And so this is also a hint that maybe they used a a tenor violin, which was something which still existed in the 17th century. It didn't anymore in the 18th. And it is a little bit bigger than a normal viola. And so I took this picture because you can actually see it. So these are two violins. This is then a viola, a normal one, which is already a little bit bigger. And this is a tenor violin. So it is still a little bit bigger than the viola. And then there's, of course, the cello of the string family. And because of this, also because of the string parts written in 5 voices, it gives a very full string sound. So that's also very nice, but actually also, again, something which you have to do to decide with just a little bit of information, just the difference of the key, which could hint to this. I also wanted to show that, so these are manuscripts, so it's not always easy to see what is written. So luckily we had Koen Uvin, who has some experience with it, who from the manuscripts wrote the text, and then we had to ask someone else to make modern editions of these scores, because it are all full scores, so with all the parts. So if a violinist would play from that, he or she would have to turn every few lines, so that's not possible. So we had to make editions. So and so just to give an example, for example, here, this is actually zu komme. So you need to look a little bit closely to it, and also often it are, of course, biblical texts. So if you know those texts, then you can search and you can fill in the gaps which are not readable. I just have from another presentation ready some text painting things, but now we will have to skip that. And so, of course, it's a big project, so we have the CD is one of the results. You can also have a look, if you are interested, on our YouTube channel from Musica Gloria, where we have this video I showed the beginning of in complete, and also another presentation video where we tell a little bit more about the project. In 2 days, we will also have a longer presentation about the CD if you are interested. More info is also on our website. And to end, so you saw on the background a little bit of a painting. So this was a beautiful drawing by Margot Pak, someone we know, who made this because we wanted to have it, our special setup in the booklet, but with the pictures it was difficult to fit it in, so we are very happy with that. So, I had to stop at 25, it's 25, so thank you very much. This was a very brief introduction to this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much, Jelle, for the invitation here to speak with you at Metaforum today. My name is Paul Newton-Jackson. I'm very delighted to give a response to this fascinating talk and also present a little short presentation about some of my own research that fits in quite nicely to some of the themes that you've been hearing about already from Beniamino. So I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Musicology, and I have 2 areas of specialization. I work on German and Central European music of the Baroque period. I'm especially interested in the music of Georg Philipp Telemann. I did my doctoral research on Telemann, but at the moment here in Leuven, I'm working on a project that looks at some much earlier repertoire, the Latin music of Scotland in the 16th century. And we've already heard a little bit about the German Baroque from Beniamino, so I thought it might be an interesting complement to look at some of the reconstruction work that I've been doing on the 16th century Scottish music, because it's interesting to see some of the similar and different challenges that these reconstruction projects face. So that's what I'm going to give you an extremely brief introduction to. So I've been working on a manuscript known as the Dunkeld Music Book. Here it is, a very beautiful manuscript made in Scotland around the middle of the 16th century. And it's very special because it's one of only a very small number of books of music that have survived from Scotland at this time. There's, due to the Reformation and wars of the 16th and 17th century, many documents were destroyed, so this is quite unique. You see it has this very beautiful binding, but actually it should be really 6 individual books. This binding was only made in the early 19th century. Originally we had these separate books, 6 of them, and the way this worked was that every singer would have their own little book that just had their part in it, and they would read from that. Unfortunately, the 6th book has gone missing sometime in the recent centuries, and this is where this idea of reconstruction comes in. The book, in terms of its contents, has got mostly copies of sacred pieces, primarily motets for the Virgin Mary by Franco-Flemish composers, Josquin, Villette, Philip van Wilder. But of primary interest to me are 2 unique settings of the Latin Mass for 6 voices, and they're anonymous, but we can show by aspects of their style that they were probably composed in Scotland. And that's what I'm going to show, talk a little bit about here. So this is one of the masses. It's called Mass called Felix Anna. It was written for the feast of the conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So it celebrates the Virgin Mary and her mother, Saint Anne. These are the part books of Cantus, Altus 1, Altus 2, Tenor, and Bassus 1. And like I said, we're missing the Bassus 2. So my job is to try and work out what might have been in this part so that we can bring this music to life and perform it. The first step is putting it into a modern score, and in some cases there are really some useful clues about what might go in this bottom part. We can take a piece of music that already exists in one of the other parts and we can move it around, and we can find that actually it fits perfectly already in the bassus part. So this is the ideal situation. It doesn't always work quite so well as this, and in many cases it needed quite different and creative solutions to find something that fitted in the bottom part. But having done that reconstruction in modern score, I decided that as well as having a modern score and with the 6 parts together, I wanted to try and recreate what this missing part book would have looked like. And here's my, my first attempt at making this part book. Why do we do this? Well, rather than reading from a modern score, if we practice singing from the original notation, this can tell us something about the experience of being a singer in the 16th century. And I also found that in the process of copying out this part myself in the original notation, I learnt a little bit about what it was like to be a scribe in the 16th century. In particular, the kinds of mistakes that are very easy to make, which I made many of. And that you find the same kinds of mistakes in the existing parts, and that kind of, I finally understood these mistakes. This is a little group that we have of musicologists here in Leuven, and we decided to just do a little private test drive of the newly reconstructed part. And that was really interesting because I learned that some things that work on paper don't always work when you try to sing them. So after this testing, and you can see we're all working from the photocopies of the original part books rather than scores. After this testing, I went back to the drawing board and did some alterations and fixes on the reconstruction. And that all led to a premiere performance last year in August. I directed an amateur choir singing this in Edinburgh as part of the Fringe Festival. And time today doesn't permit me to play any of this recording, but if you're interested, you can take a photo of this slide and follow the link to the YouTube video there. This was just an amateur performance. A professional recording is in progress and should be released hopefully within the next 12 months. So thank you for your attention with this small introduction to some of the reconstruction work that I'm doing. And what I wanted to really bring to your attention was this idea that even though this work here and Beniamino's work are looking at very different musical contexts and very different time periods, I think the really interesting thing is that both projects, and in fact all projects involving bringing early music to life, involve some form of reconstruction, whether it's a missing part that needs to be written out, or whether it's a decision about what instruments should you put on your continuo line, which organ should you use, which registration should you use on your organ, which kind of instrument should you use on the second violetta part. These are all decisions that we have to make today, and sometimes these can be quite interesting and creative decisions. And it really shows that when we're working with these sources of early music, there's always a lot of information missing in the source, and we as scholars and performers have a lot of, I believe, very interesting and important work to do filling in some of those gaps. And I just want to return to, for my closing remarks, to one of the comments that was made in the introduction to Beniamino's talk, this quote by Harold Kummerling about Österreich being an important collector but not such an important composer. And I think it's wonderful that you showed in your paper today that actually that's not true. His compositions are very beautiful, they're worth recording, they're worth listening to, and none of that, it wouldn't have been possible to show the beauty of this music without the reconstruction and the investigation and the research that you and Musica Gloria have done. And I'm also looking forward to bringing this music that I've reconstructed to modern audiences so they too can appreciate how beautiful it is. And I'm now delighted to open the floor to some questions.
Maybe a short first question, Beniamino. Did you find the same gaps in the scores as Paul found in the Scottish manuscript, or?
No, not such big gaps. But of course, sometimes it's not so readable, or there are small mistakes. But we were quite lucky that all the parts were there, so it was not a reconstruction in that sense of the word, so yes.
So I was very much impressed by all the effort you put into selecting just the right organ, just the right church, just the right position. Even the singers have to step on a bench and so on. But forgive me if I may be wrong, but it seems to me to contrast a little bit with the elastic conscience that many of the original composers had. I've never heard about Bach agonizing over him having to play on a different organ at a different location. My understanding is in some scores he doesn't even indicate which exact instruments, and if he didn't have this instrument, no problem, he would just perform with something else. And so, as I said, I appreciate all the effort, but aren't we exaggerating a little bit and maybe also over-interpreting what the original composer meant?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and of course it's a choice of everyone to choose how far he or she goes into this. But I think that by going so far you can discover a lot of interesting things, and also you can make sure that there's a huge differentiation, because if we would play Bach, Österreich, Mahler everything on exactly the same instruments, there would be just less variety. And so, yeah, there may be two things. So one thing is that sometimes when we speak so detailed about some things, it might sound as if we limit ourselves, but actually the opposite is true, because by searching for this fitting organ, for example, there come new ideas and you can understand the music better. So I also think that if we would have played it, to be very extreme, on modern instruments with modern temperament, I think I could say that it would be less beautiful in a way. And the other thing is that indeed there was a lot of variety, and the music from Georg Österreich was of course performed in different churches, but of course it was not performed on a 19th century organ. So we indeed went far searching, but we didn't find the organ where Georg Österreich performed on, for example. And also, yes, there is the question of the exact instrument, but I think it's more what makes really a difference is if it's in the same, how to say, same area and same period of, yeah, of the music. But maybe you want to add something to that, or?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting question, and I think that you're right. It can sometimes seem like those of us who are interested in this early music are going to some very extreme lengths to try to find just the right context, just the right details for these recreations of early music. And it's true, certainly, that all of the composers of this time would have been very flexible in how they did scored their pieces and how they were performed. But no matter which organ or which collection of instruments Bach chose for his cantatas, they were all instruments from his period. And he had a lot of choice, because at his time there were a lot of instruments from his period around. And of course, in your case, you had a lot more restrictions. Even finding one instrument that has the correct specifications to be plausible for that time, as you showed, was quite a challenge. So I think that it was very interesting to see that journey of finding the instrument, and it shows actually how difficult it can be to find even one instrument that fits with the music in question, since so much has changed from their time to ours.
Mm-hmm. Is that an answer? Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Can artificial intelligence help you to reconstruct the missing part of the Mass of Felix Anna?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question, and that's an area that a few scholars are exploring today. With artificial intelligence, the most important thing to guarantee that the quality is going to be high and the results are going to be good is a large training set of data that goes into training this model. So in some cases, I think there's a lot of potential for using this in examples, in cases where a lot of music has survived. For example, in music from the Low Countries from the 16th century, we have a large number of sources, and we could train an algorithm that would predict pretty well what should go in a missing voice. The problem here for Scotland is that we have only 2 major manuscripts of polyphony, so the training data would be very limited and would give us quite erratic results, I think. And the reason this is a problem is because the surviving sources from Scotland show us that in Scotland in the 16th century, they had a very different style of composition, even to England, and especially to mainland Europe. So it would be very difficult to use a language model like artificial intelligence to fill in the gaps in this particular case. But I think in other cases it can work really well. So thank you for your question.
going to make exactly the same point. No need to make it twice.
Maybe I can go a little bit deeper into that, Paul. So the idea that Scotland has its own repertoire, its own style of composition, is a little bit in contrast with the rest of the volume, which was quite international, with Josquin and Adrien Willard, and which was common practice throughout all of Europe. So if you go a little bit more in detail to the composition you reconstructed, the base of the Felix Anna Mass, what are the typical Scottish characteristics in that?
Thank you. That's a great question. There are some very interesting features in terms of the way that the Mass is structured. So we don't have very many surviving Masses from Scotland, but in all of them they give a very large emphasis on the fourth movement, the Sanctus. So in every Scottish Mass, the Sanctus is much, much longer than every other movement, even though it has not very much text. So you compare the Credo and the Gloria, which have a lot of text, they've got to get through a lot of words. In these Scottish Masses, the Sanctus and the Benedictus are more than double the length of the Gloria and the Credo combined. So really large proportions, very different from the practice on the continent.
This has a practical reason, or?
We don't know. We suspect that there may be some liturgical reason for that. Some aspect of the ceremony that is happening at the same time that this is sung is taking a long time, so there's a lot of space for them to compose very long and elaborate music in this part. But that's still a matter for ongoing research. But that's one example of the way that the Scottish Masses are quite unique compared to ones from other parts of the world.
So we regularly hear about new manuscripts that are being discovered in old libraries that people haven't apparently bothered to check the shelves for long-lost treasures. But in Österreich's case, you mentioned that it was discovered in a digitized section. So to me, this is a bit weird. I would think that once something is digitized, it's open to the world. And the people who have digitized it have already looked at it and probably deemed it worthy of digitizing. So, I mean, is there, apart from these hidden manuscripts in old libraries, is there another hidden, at first glance, pool of things that someone has just blindly digitized without even bothering to look at it, and now musicologists like yourself can dive into? Is this a real thing that you can look up in digitized collections and still discover novel things, or is only those things that are worth digitizing are those being digitized?
I don't think there's very much a relation between if it's good and then they digitize it, and if it's bad they don't digitize it, because I think it's more a matter of a library having enough money to digitize it. So nowadays there's so much music which is digitized that you can indeed discover things digitized. I think the one who did the scan, I don't know if he or she really read the music. And also, yeah, it's as you saw, the manuscript is not so clear, so it's not that you look at the page and you think, oh, this is fantastic music. You still have to really read it, and we also played parts of it to decide on the program. Because of course, that it's not known or not yet recorded is not a reason to do it. It should be also good music, worth it performing. But maybe you have something to add to that, right?
Yeah. I think that was a great response and a fantastic question. Of course, 50 years ago when scholars were looking for new music, they're actually looking through the dusty archives and pulling books off the library shelf. But it is true that nowadays there is a lot of music that has been digitized as part of a library's digitization program, but has not been looked at all. Because the people who are digitizing it, their job is to digitize as much of whatever is in their library as possible. They're, in many cases, not musicologists. They're digitizing all kinds of sources. And the hope is, after it's been digitized, then some musicologists, some performers will come along and find some interesting treasures in there. So a lot of the really interesting discoveries happening in musicology today do take place within things that have been digitized, but probably haven't been looked at, aside from the person who put it on the scanner or took the photo of it, which, you know, could be only a few seconds looking at each page. But at the same time, there's a lot of collections that still need to be digitized, and a lot of work is still ongoing. And this manuscript was only digitized in November of last year as part of a project, a collaboration between the Alamere Foundation here in Leuven and the University of Edinburgh. So this had been sitting in the University of Edinburgh Library for a long time without being digitized, and it's only now that it's been digitized that it's possible for more detailed research to happen with it. So it's a two-way process, the research into the manuscripts and the digitizing of the manuscripts. Yeah.
Very pleased with this kind of research. It really makes it possible that our cultural heritage is reachable. But I wonder how you financially manage it. And so you're an academic, you're paid by university, but I suppose that you do it in a private way. So is there a possibility to use certain resources, or how did you manage it to create?
So this project was partly subsidized by the Flemish government, so with a project subvention. And then we also had, so that was not enough, so we also had a crowdfunding, and then we had concerts which we did around the recording, so then with that we could finance already a little part of the rehearsals. And then there's of course now the CD selling, but that's a difficult topic nowadays because from all the streaming online we don't see any money that goes to the label, and that's like really not a lot. So the only thing there is if people buy a physical copy, and yes, unfortunately that's really not enough to cover the costs. And besides that, there's also quite some volunteering and yeah, let's say investment then also from my part into this project, into the ensemble, for the future. But yeah, so that's kind of the picture how it was financed.
Our country more difficult than in other countries?
I don't really know. I think it's compared to other countries, it's rather good. But for example, in France, there's still way more money for ensembles, but they are cutting down also now. So I don't really know how the exact difference is. Yeah.
May I ask in Dutch, please? Ja. Het betreft de opleiding, het beoefenen van muziek in die tijd, wat een bijzonder ook intellectuele arbeid is. Was dit los van de universiteiten in die tijd ontwikkeld? Of was dit geïntegreerd? Of had het verband met pauselijke beïnvloeding en religie en introductie binnen universiteiten? Dus de verhouding tussen deze kunstzinnige, meestal religieuze muziek, werd die gesitueerd op universitair niveau of ontwikkelde die zich daar compleet los van?
Dus, did you understand a bit, or it's about it's about where the education of music found place, so where these composers and musicians were trained? Was it like in university, or was it in schools or private, or
yes,
maybe you can start if you want.
Was the question Particularly for this or for both?
More in general, I think. Either
Also.
more general in that time frame.
The influence of religion on the Pope.
Ah, yes, yes. You want to start or?
Yes, in this case, the main places of education for these musicians is very much monastic centres. So we have the abbeys and monasteries of Scotland. We suspect that this manuscript was created in a cathedral, which was also a monastery in central Scotland. We know also that a lot of musicians from Scotland during this period were travelling to Paris and to Leuven and studying and then returning with their training. There were universities in Scotland at this time. Scotland had the University of St Andrews, which was founded in the 15th century, like Leuven, but a lot of the musicians would still travel, so they were moving around a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in the Baroque period in Germany, it was very much in schools, like, for example, the Thomasschule in Leipzig, where Bach taught. That's also where Österreich went a few years, and so that was, maybe a bit like the Kunsthumaniora, but indeed very much related to the church and to the religion, because they had to perform in the churches for the masses, and then so they all had to sing, but there was also a division between the very good singers who then did the more important churches, and the ones who sang a little bit less good. They were in a bigger group, and so a lot of the musical educations happened in these kind of schools, and then to go even a step further, there was a lot of private teaching, which was sometimes just normal teaching, or sometimes also by being able to play with your teacher and so on, and to then climb in the artistic ladder.
Just to build on what you were saying about education, I was interested to learn that Georg Österreich was born and had his initial education in Magdeburg, is that right?
Yes.
Which is also from, I'm very interested in Magdeburg, it's the birthplace of
course.
Georg Philipp Telemann as well, about 15 years later. Two very important composers, and composers of very high quality. I wonder if you know anything about what the musical education in Magdeburg was like in the late 17th century that might explain these high quality composers coming from there.
Not so much. Also, I don't know if there's a lot of known about, so there's only what I mentioned. There was a teacher in Magdeburg who gave lessons to Georg Österreich, because apparently he saw that he was talented. But then he went to Leipzig, so and then Wolfenbüttel. So I'm not sure what else was in Magdeburg. Good soil, probably.
Good water, good beer.
Yes.
Case that a lot of churches needed these artists, so they were asked, so it was a possibility to have a career, while of course nowadays this is far less evident to find a job in that way. So a lot of people were quite interested in music, a lot of people listened to music. Also these aristocratic leaders, they had their own concerts, and he also participated in composing for a nobility.
Yes.
So the atmosphere in the 18th century must have been quite interested in music. If you compare it nowadays with there is also a lot of music now, but in a quite different way, I suppose.
Yes, it was very much linked to the church. There was always, at least every Sunday, but actually more than that, music in the services. And indeed, then there were a lot of chords, and one way to show how much power they had was to show what the good musicians they had, and also how many. So it was a kind of how to say, wedstrijd or the competition, yes, status symbol and competition, like, oh, this other chord has 3 more musicians, so so indeed something which is quite different than today, yes.
Maybe another question on interpretation. You talked very briefly on the basso continuo. That is a numbered bass in the scores you used. I'm always a little bit curious how big the freedom of the continuo player is these days. So how much do you fill in or compose yourself while playing, and how far do you go in this concrete project?
Yes, also, again, a very interesting question. So indeed, so we have, as a keyboard player, let's put it in this setting, so on harpsichord or organ. So you have the left hand, which you just play what is written, and then you have the chords. But yes, actually you are really free how you put the chord, how, if you put it in the middle or a bit higher, or and so on. And then there are, of course, rules about how to go from one chord to the other. So one example is that a good way to do is contrary motion. So if the bass goes up, you go down with the other one, because parallel octaves and things like that are to be avoided. And also there are some treatises who explain how you should play continuo. But indeed, there stays quite some freedom, and so you can choose if you play a chord with 4 voices or with 6 voices. You can also decide if you add some ornaments, if you add some runs. For example, there is one aria which starts with only continuo, and then it's clear that you have to play some kind of melody. You cannot play just chords. So yes, there's still quite some liberty and quite some decisions to be made on this. And then also, this was not so much in Georg Österreich, it's like just before, but 20 years later, in Germany, there was a full way of playing continuo, where you could even add notes who are not really in the chord, so kind of Baroque blue notes. And so also there you can get a lot of inspiration and ideas from the sources, and then you have still a lot of freedom, yes.
Are very young. How have you managed to reach them? Or
a lot of them we met during our studies. So both Neil and myself, we studied at the conservatory in Brussels and in The Hague. Both were and are very important for early music. And yeah, in The Hague, for example, when I was studying there, we were with 150 specifically for early music. So and then we are working as freelance musicians, so we play also in other ensembles where we meet other musicians, and like that we create a group with, yeah, we also try to have, how to say, with musicians with a similar view on playing this music and on sound and ornaments and things like that, yes.
I think we can close this session here. Thank you very much for the nice introduction, the reply, and the questions. I hope to see you soon back.
Thank you.